lot of fun.
Hello, thank you for choosing the video. My name is 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚎𝚛𝚒, and today we're going to be reviewing and analyzing chapter 1055 of the One Piece manga, titled New Age. Now, I really liked this UTA page that Oda added that I don't know what it ties into with the movie and stuff like that, but this idea of a magna opus painted on the walls, and the page seems to start off with Uta receiving wishes and maybe dreams and desperate cries for help, and the chapter begins on Nami and Otama, who throughout the Wano arc, especially the Onigashima raid, Kiku and Otama seem to be granting wishes and directing wish power and frequencies and all that stuff of wishes to power up Luffy and other members with people's hopes and dreams. And I think that this kind of cover page directly I know it's not the cover page, but this little extra page that Oda added seems to me kind of be hinting at that idea. And then the idea that she's drawing all this on her walls and stuff, I think is some crazy, death painter stuff. And
you're not gonna believe this. He killed 16 Czechoslovakians. Guy was an interior decorator. His house looked like shit.
On this first page, starting off the chapter, we see Nami with Otama, and then they are also accompanied by Zeus, which implies to me that in some form Big Mom is probably still around if her homie is still activated and her devil fruit soul pieces have not returned back to her or dissipated because of her death. And the chapter opens on Green Bull still attacking the scabbards, and after kind of toying with the scabbards, Green Bull makes a coil attack which takes out Raizo and then ensnares the rest of the scabbards. We then cut to a major chunk of the chapter, which is the Pluton reveal, and Robin and Law following Sukiyaki, past his secret weird room with the dolls. Every time that I've ever followed an old person into their basement to see their doll collection, it never works out great for me. But I guess this is a different, it's a different thing. But everything about this page reminds me of when we first saw Poneglyph, when Robin followed Cobra into the crocodilish door down below to see the first Poneglyph that we ever see in the manga. I think it's chapter 202. They even had the same steps, the same kind of framing walking down here. Now, something that's always kind of struck me as crazy is when we're in Alabasta, everything here that we're told seems to be a lie. That everything that Cobra says is not the truth and that they're not really there protecting it, and Robin sees right through it. Well, here, on the other side of the world, it seems like maybe no one is seeing through the deception this time. We get this hyena talk, and there's all sorts of crazy stuff with myths and hyenas and mythical things like that, but one of the main things when it comes to hyenas was that they could change their sexes, and that sometimes they were just mythical beings that could represent both sexes and change between them and stuff. And then we get a bunch of these shots here of, it seems like Robin kind of taking up half the frame and then Law taking up half the frame. I wonder if that's kind of hinting at that sort of mythological hyena type archetype, which mainly makes me think of the sea monster stuff talking around Roger and Odin's flashback with the idea of the two sovereigns meeting, and how if we're really going to break things down to what's different during this adventure than it was during Roger's age and Roger's time, perhaps the idea that Law and his powers and Robin and her powers are included in this journey is a huge factor in determining why it's different. The process is going to be different this time than it was when Roger found Laugh Tale. Maybe the two of them kind of hold the key to why the recipe is different this time. But all this stuff of crawling these holes and going down, up and down these stairs, and it's really, to me, it just kind of seems like being led to a trap, just like in Alabasta. That entire chamber around and tomb, official tomb that was around the first Poneglyph, was made to crumble from one thing getting pulled out of the wall. It was basically a trap designed to be triggered by just one little thing like that. And I can't help but get the same vibes that there's something going on like that here, especially with Sakayuki looking at Robin and Law in a very vulnerable position right there. Now, this place reminds me a ton of Fishman Island, We get some crazy vibes. When it comes to ores, he's got like a cross on him, and I think in this corner we kind of see this idea of a Christian cross representation here. And then this entire idea of Wano and what its purpose is. I agree. I think there's something going on with the volcano, and that when that Mount Fuji volcano erupts, it takes out the Wano borders and just kills everything by just flattening and obliterating all the land for just kind of a clean slate, literally. And that's kind of a main reason why Momo hasn't wanted to open up the borders and stuff. But I think there's lots of stuff going on. And the idea that this is maybe the official end of one end of the Grand Line, going back to this idea that this reminds me so much of the Alabasta stuff. I think that one of these pillars could be considered Wano, one of these pillars could be considered Alabasta, as the two ends and starting of kind of the Grand Line and the trap that getting stuck in there is. And then the middle, especially with the crown and stuff, maybe being the Emu and Fishman Island representation at the bottom. I really think that all this stuff is getting hinted at here, and just the entire power structure of the One Piece world is geographically, like Tekken always says, is everything. And I think in this case, parties in the world are using that obviously to control the world and the flow of basically energies, and we're going to see that coming up. But we see this poneglyph down here, and it's a load poneglyph. We know it's a red one, all that stuff. We get a real big hint to something being underneath the cave of the volcano. Now, something being asleep and awakened, I have to watch my poneglyph videos, a trap video for some more stuff on that, but the idea that this could maybe be a part of that, or a missing head, or organs, or something along those lines, I think could be very possible when it comes to what could be sleeping down here in regards to Pluton. I think asking questions is one of the most important things that Oda is trying to teach us, and Robin asks a very important question. If all of this stuff would result in kind of destroying Wano and leaving it vulnerable and all sorts of stuff, why would Odin want to do that? And I think that the idea that perhaps a bunch of people could be so disenfranchised by the world and just what it ultimately is, that they want to destroy it. And I think that Odin, and especially with what Dawn is going to be at first, I think the idea of wanting to destroy and take revenge on their enemies and oppressors could be a huge part of exactly what is motivating, or was motivating, Odin when it came to taking down the borders and what the purpose of Wano was to be in the future. And then all over the place, this time they're covered in mold, and I think that's a pretty big clue, but we get those pineal gland, little Nolan head chestnut things all over the place here, and they're at the bottom of the place here, and I really think that those are a big sign that the moving parts of the world that are justice and that seem to control and rule and dictate everything, I think that they've kind of taken over a bunch of symbols, and this kind of ancient pine cone, pineal gland, beehive type thing, I think that they've kind of turned it on its head, and they have the Marines and those in charge, whenever we see this symbol, I think it's a false type clue to be weary, because it's ultimately some sort of a trap or fishing line to trap and ensnare any sort of disruptors to that system in order for the powers that are currently in charge of the One Piece world to stay in power. And when the chapter cuts back to the fight in the Flower Capital, we even get some dialogue about no man can stand against the forces of nature alone, and I really wonder if maybe there's some sort of world-ending nature force type deal waiting to be unleashed in Wano, and its main purpose is to perhaps reorganize the world by destroying it. And then we get some pretty good character development with Momo. I like, his attitude here of we can't keep depending on the people who want to leave Wano to stay here and save it. I really thought that was a good moment to kind of see him come full circle a lot. But going back to the beginning of the chapter with this idea of being powered by belief and worship and type stuff, as soon as Yamato is impressed by Momo, by what Momo says, by his actions, all that stuff, as soon as Yamato is impressed by it, then Momo is able to recreate a bolo breath. and use Kaido's power. He's not able to replicate it before this, and then as soon as he kind of maybe gains Yamato's respect, boom, he's able to replicate Kaido's bolo breath. And I think we get some pretty huge clues coming up here with stuff going on with Shanks. I went over a lot of this stuff in the last video about weird things going on with Shanks, but
I don't know, man. You've been seeming sus lately. It's almost like we have an imposter among us.
we open to Shanks, caped in shadow, drenched in darkness, where his sword is highlighted, and that's the only time, this panel is the only time we're going to see it in this chapter. Like usual, we get to see it once and then it's gone. And I say highlighted because the gust of wind is directly connected to the end of his sword here. The end of Shanks' sword and the wind are completely connected here, kind of reminding me of like Dragon in Logtown. And we see him sending a Conqueror's Haki wave directly to Green Bull to tell him to stop. And I think it's very interesting here that Shanks specifically makes a note that he's not disgusted or doesn't think anything's wrong with what Green Bull is doing or saying, but that he thinks it's not the right time to do it. Like, basically Shanks says here, I don't think what you're doing is that bad, just, you know, you can't do it right now. That's just such a weird thing. But this entire scene, I want to look at this panel very quickly, because one, we don't see Lucky Roo, we see him without his food, which is always a rarity. That always means there's a clue coming on. Shanks in this panel, we get this hockey stuff, and really it gave me the vibes here like a radio burst, like a radio signal being sent right to Green Bull. Well, I really think a lot's going on with Shanks, and here we see a huge exertion of his power, but once again, it's all tied to Shanks' sword, okay? Every single time he does anything, it's always his sword that is highlighted when he's doing all these actions. Every single feat of power that Shanks has performed in some way, his sword has been involved. Even referring to his fights with Mihawk, we assume that the sword fight was involved. I mean, every single thing, every show of power that Shanks has demonstrated in the series has centered around his sword. And even here, we get the wind blows directly into Shanks' hilt. Now, looking at this picture, we see the rope ties to the cannon, ties to the bolt on the ground. Shanks is standing on it. His one leg looks different than the other one with the shoes. One of them looks like he's actually wearing a high heel to me. We get the barrel kind of falling over, and especially going back to what I said about the coil attack that Green Bull used in the beginning of the chapter. I think that all of this is a big radio clue. And Shanks' sword, Griffon, being a type of antenna that can send radio signals to things that are connected to the same maybe source or program in some way, but that Shanks here is sending a radio signal in the form of Haki through the antenna of his sword, and in particular, something called radio frequency induction is what I think is being portrayed in these panels and ultimately being hinted at by Oda here, which is the use of a radio frequency, a magnetic field, to transfer energy by means of electromagnetic induction in a near field. A radio frequency alternating current is passed through a coil of wire that acts as the transmitter, and a second coil or conducting object magnetically coupled to the first coil acts as the receiver. Now, all this stuff touching and you know, connecting here and coiling together with the ropes and stuff, I think is a big idea, especially with, I think, what's kind of behind the scenes with Shanks and exactly what's going on with the Marines and that relationship. This idea that they have sort of a radio connection. And I think in this instance, specifically something with the Red Hair Pirate's ship connecting through Shanks, through his sword, that all that connection being sent out towards, you know, his target. In this case, it's Green Bull. But I also think that all this, you know, radio transmitting frequencies idea ties to something else too with Shanks, which I think is hugely tied to the Straw Hat. I think that when it comes to this stuff, you can go on the Wikipedia page. The very first one is a radio frequency identification, a RFID. Now, these are the red tags they put on animals in captivity and in the wild to track where they are and to, use computers to monitor the movements of those animals. Well, all of this stuff, the refib, the name, everything, makes me think of the red strap and red line around Luffy's straw hat. And the idea that for Shanks, maybe the straw hat is a type of radio signal transmitter for Shanks to always keep an eye on Luffy and, make sure he's moving and growing according to Shanks' plans that he maybe alluded to last chapter. Especially when Shanks showed up at Marineford, he showed up not to where Luffy was. He showed up to where the straw hat was. And then we see kind of some very weird selection, a very weird selection of flashback memories for Shanks to see. And then these final two panels, which I cannot tell what's going on. If that's Shanks letting go of his sword handle, well, one, it's the wrong hand, and his other hand that's supposed to be missing would be gripping it right there where the hilt is. There's no guard going over the sword handle, and then the hilt is extremely different than what his normal Griffon sword is. So I'm not sure what this panel is. If you know what it is, please comment what you think that is, because I asked a few people and we could not really tell what those two panels were actually conveying. But to me, it's all kind of this idea of this kind of hidden power in hands, and we see something like a magician and we don't see what's in the other hand. And then we see Brook playing some music while everyone's distracted. We see the other, I think, wishing personification thing, balloon, in Wano, which is Kiku. And then the chapter ends on a familiar face just popped into my head, which makes me think about Luffy, getting things implanted into his head and in his cloud head all the time like a balloon in chapter 1. And to kind of end this review, I really wanted to look at the word and the title, New Age. Now, age means a lot of stuff. And aside from the obvious stuff about, periods of time and stuff like that. In French, age means a beam, like a central bar of a plow or a shaft, and this idea that I've talked about in other videos where Luffy's kind of being a Polar Express type thing where he's kind of plowing the entire world for the Marines and the news and mail service and registered mailboxes and governments to kind of take over. Essentially plowing the entire One Piece world and readying it for harvest to be utilized for perhaps a different purpose, good or bad. I think that he's kind of playing around with that. In Japanese, it actually means fried bean curd, but also raising something or loading something. But it can also mean to fry something or something that's fried. In a bunch of different languages, it means eye and also awe. Old Norse, aga was to scare. To chastise, impress, agitate, and to scare. So this idea of being frightened by the new age, I think, is getting touched on with this. All these plant-based powers in the recent chapters, I think, is being touched on by this Ternate definition of age, where it actually means the trunk of a tree or a tree trunk. And it also means a levee or an embankment. So this idea of these dams that are built around Wano, I think this chapter also touched on that. And going back to what I've been saying in a lot of videos about Wano and Onigashima and all this stuff kind of being a boiling pot or a boiling cauldron for maybe evil emotions or intentions or regret or feelings or wills, I think is definitely being clued in on here, because in Yoruba, age actually means kettle. Knowing that age ultimately stems from the Proto-Indo-European word heu, which I think is how you say it, but it meant vital force. This idea that a new vital force for the One Piece world is perhaps being brewed in this Wano kettle, I think is extremely relevant. And there's this special thing that Oda sent out for chapter 100 way back in like 2000. It had some characters drawn from the back, kind of hinting at what he thought was going to be coming in the next 100 chapters. And one of them is a very obvious Wano clue. And I think all the other ones were pretty, blatant clues too. It looks like there's a Boa Hancock one. Maybe this guy with the stars is something related to Vegapunk. And then, of course, the Elbaf giant guy here in the corner. But this Wano guy being a sort of pot or a kettle type shape, I think is a huge huge clue to what Wano's ultimate purpose is, and ultimately how Odin, kind of boiling Odin, the reverse of that might be a Eden egg that survives, a primordial lava type bath for the entire One Piece world. But we'll touch on that more in future videos, of course. My name is 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚒𝚘𝚡. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future videos. Please comment with what you thought of the chapter and if you know what was going on in those 2 panels. And I think that's going to do it for One Piece chapter 1055. My name is 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚒𝚑𝚝, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.